Hi, kids. Welcome back to Bible School. Miss Nancy wants to say today's lesson is about some travelers in the Bible. This is very unique, and it's not just traveling like you think. I'm going to bring up some points, and then I'm going to bring up something that I never told you kids before. But I want you to know right up front that God is jealous. What about that? Have you ever had a boyfriend or girlfriend and you thought, he's speaking to her, or she went over there and talked to him? That kind of jealousy, that's not really, truly what it means when it says God is jealous. But I'm going to get into that in a little bit. But right now, let's travel through the Bible, starting in Genesis, and it goes all over the place. The first travelers that I want to talk to you about is Adam and Eve. Did you know they traveled? To start with, they traveled with the Lord. The voice of the Lord would come walking in the cool of the day, and they would get a fellowship with that. Right through the garden they'd walk. I can just imagine it, that plush garden with everything so perfect. And they had such sweet fellowship, and they had a paradise right around them. But then, like I mentioned last time in the other lesson, here's what happened. They took of a tree that he told them not to eat. And Eve was the one that messed up, but Adam had a part in it too. But anyway, they got cursed. And that's why when I tell you we are all sinners, is because we have Adam and Eve's blood in us. And I don't judge them harshly, because I'm thinking I would have been nosy Nancy standing there looking at that fruit that God said, you can have anything, but don't do that. The one thing that somebody tells us we cannot do or should not do is the very thing that Satan thinks, I'm going to use that against him. And that's exactly what he done. So I just want you to know that's where sin entered. So after that, God come looking for him. And he said, Adam, where are you? Well, they had traveled, and they had hid behind some bushes. And they'd sewed some fig leaves together. You know why? They was in the garden naked. They was like babies. They didn't know right from wrong. Up to that point, all they knew was right. They had no shame because they didn't know to be ashamed. But anyway, God said, where are you? And he had to find them. So they traveled to him. And he said, what have you done? So Eve and Adam and even the serpent tells what they've done. And so God said, we've got to get them out of here. And so he put them out of the garden. And I'm just going to go ahead and read a little bit. And he said, this is why. We got to put him out because he might put forth his hand and take of the tree of life and eat and live forever. And he would have lived forever as a sinner. And so here's what God did. Therefore, the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. And then it says this, so he drove out the man, and he placed at the garden, at the east end of the Garden of Eden, cherubims with a flaming sword, which turned every which way to keep them out. So he sent them out, and then he drove them out, but they traveled. And then the next one I think about is Noah. Noah, God brought. Let's see what he says. And the Lord said unto Noah, come. So Adam and Eve went. And Noah, he came. God said, come. And he went, thou and all thy family, into the ark. And for thee I have seen righteous before me in this generation. Noah was set apart because he was faithful. He preached 120 years and told everybody, come, it's going to rain. Well, there'd never been rain on the earth before this time, but he obeyed God and he come in, and then the rain come down. You know that story. And they was floating all over. But the people on the outside were drowning and probably clawing at the edge of the ark, unless that rain was so hard when the heavens opened, it just drove them into the ground. Miss Nancy don't know. But those people traveled, but Noah and his family traveled too. And then I think about the Tower of Babel. It's been a long time since we had that story. And that's a city where all the people spoke the same language. And they said, let's build us a city and a tower that will reach to heaven. And God says, we need to go down and check this out and see if it's what, we're hearing. Because he hears us from heaven, and he hears our prayers, but he hears other things too. So they came down, God the Father, God the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and the people was wanting to reach heaven in a different way. Well, he said, well, here's what we're going to have to do. He said, they can all understand each other. So he was the one, in case you ever wonder why some people speak Chinese, some Japanese, some French, some Spanish, some English. He scattered them. That's how they went. But he also changed their language, mixed it up. And that's why it's called Babel, understanding. There's no understanding in their language. And he scattered them. Well, because he scattered them, they went everywhere. Well, that's how the gospel reaches the nations too. And I thought that was fascinating. But some was sent or drove. Some was saying come. Some got scattered. And then Elijah, a man of God, he said, go to the brook Cherith. Well, there was a famine in the land and there was no water going to come down for years. And he said, drink from the brook, and I have sent, so even the ravens traveled. I've sent the ravens there, and they're going to feed you bread and meat of a morning, bread and meat of a night. So they traveled to get the things that they brought him to eat, and he drank from the brook. But then, after a while, the brook dried up. So God said, go over to Zarephath. And he said, there's a widow woman there, and the brook's name was Cherith. I'm not sure whether I said that or not. But he said, go over there, and I've got a widow woman there to take care of you. And he goes there, and he gets to that city, and he sees that widow woman. She's picking up 2 sticks, and she's going to make the last meal that she has with a little oil and a little meal, and she's going to fix it, and her son's going to eat and die. Well, he said, before you do that, would you bring me some water? And she said, yes. So she went to get the water, and on her way, he said, bring me. So the widow woman has to travel to do this, but she chose to do that. So it was a leap of faith to feed this man of God more than her and her son. So she went and cooked and brought it to him. Well, then after this, years down the road, her son dies. Well, it says Elijah went up to the room on his bed, laid him on his bed, whether he's traveling up and down. But anyway, that child did die. And Elijah brought him back to life. He said, God, well, it wasn't Elijah, God, please put the spirit back in this child. So wherever that child was, Nosy Nancy, I wonder where he went, who he saw, and all that stuff. But anyway, we don't know that. We'll know it one day. But anyway, he went somewhere, but he came back and was in that body again. And he presented him to his mom, and his mom said, because of this, I know you're a man of God, and the words that you speak is true. I love that story. And then I think about a man named Jonah. God said, go to Nineveh. So Jonah went to Joppa, a different place, and he got on board a ship. And that ship was traveling, and there was a storm coming. God said, I told you what to do. And so the ship's captain went down and got Jonah, and he said, wake up, wake up. Then they figured out that the reason all this was happening to them and they was about to sink was Jonah's fault. So they asked what they could do, and he said, throw me overboard. I can just see the men on board. They worked hard, trying not to have to, but finally they agreed. And here Jonah was traveling down from the ship into the ocean, and here's a big old fish and a whale, it's called both, coming up to meet him. Whoa! And that whale swallowed him, and it says he traveled to the bottom where the bars was. So he traveled there, and then you know the rest of that story. Jonah prayed right before he died, and he said, Lord, save me. And God gave him another chance. Well, then the whale was already going towards Nineveh, so the whale journeyed, and then he got there and vomited Jonah up on the shore, and Jonah went to Nineveh and done what he said. And then all the people, they got right there. And Ezekiel, I love this story. Ezekiel saw a vision of a man where it was fire from his waist down, and then from his waist up, it was a bright, shining light. And that's not the only thing. Here's how he traveled. That spirit took him by the hair of the head and put him over Jerusalem between heaven and earth. And there's where he was, seeing everything going on. And I think that is so fascinating. So he traveled between heaven and earth. And then Moses. God said, Moses, I want you to leave your people and go out. And I'm not even going to tell you where. So what did Moses do? Moses left most of his family, and he did leave that place, and he didn't know where he was going. He traveled a lot, and then I thought about later on, but I want to get back to this, that he led the children in the wilderness for 40 years. So he had a big deal to do. But going back to when he didn't leave his family, God had told him before that, he said, if you will do this, I'll make your seed, which is your family in the future, as the sand by the seashore and as the stars in the sky. So anyway, I thought that was really good. And then Moses got to travel up on Mount Sinai and spend about 80 days with the Lord. 40 of it was uncalled for, but the people messed up, so he had to do it twice. And then I thought about Abraham, a friend of God. God said, I want you to go yonder. And it was 3 days away. And he said, I want you to go to the mountain. I want you to kill your son, offer your son as a sacrifice to me. And so what did he do? Abraham, he left early in the morning, got up and got everything ready, took a couple of young men with him, and him and Isaac, his son, after the 3 days journey, Abe told the boys, he said, you stay here. Me and my son's going to go yonder, and we're going to worship, and we will return. Abraham knew that if he had to sacrifice his son, that God would bring him back because he had that promise. And it took him a long time to get that special son, but we're not going to go into that today. And then there was a woman. She was caught in an act that wasn't very flattering at all. They didn't bring the man in. But anyway, they was going to stone this woman to death. So I could just see them dragging her by the arm. She might have had part of her clothes on or something. Maybe not. She might have been naked. But she was there, and they had all picked up stones. That's how they was going to kill her. But Jesus was there. And Jesus bent down and wrote in the dirt, in the sand. And then he did it again. Well, they all started leaving. They'd all picked up a big stone, starting with the older ones and going down to the younger ones. And one by one, as Jesus wrote whatever he did, they all left. And then Jesus said, where's your accusers? And she said, there are none, Lord. He said, neither do I condemn thee. But then he told this woman, and we don't know her name, we will one day, go and sin no more. So she went somewhere. And then David, Saul, the old wicked king, he was a good one to start with, but he blew it. Saul was trying to kill David. He knew David was going to be the next one to reign. But David and Jonathan, Saul's son, were very best of friends. And David said, your dad's going to kill me. And he goes, no, he won't. He'd tell me before he done anything. Anyway, there was a javelin involved. Not once, but twice, I think. But anyway, Jonathan ended up, he said, I'll tell you what my dad's going to do because he'll tell me. And he goes out and he does what he's going to do. There's an act and a young lad there, and the young lad goes back, so that young lad travels. I thought about the young lad at this point that brought the fish and stuff. He had to travel to do that. But anyway, there's all kinds of travelers in the Bible. But I lost my train of thought. Excuse me for just a second. Oh, David had to leave, and he went out into the field, and then when he got the bad news, he went and he hid in a cave, and then he ended up traveling to where Goliath's people was, the enemy, and he stayed there. But David traveled finally till he became king, and he was a good one. And David loved God with all his heart. And then Mary and Joseph, you know their story. They traveled to pay taxes. And while they were there, what happened? She had a baby boy. She had a son. The woman had a son. Joseph was her husband, and he had not known her. That means they wasn't really married in the way of man, but they traveled. They did that. And then I think about the time when Jesus was 12 years old. He was in the temple, and then they thought he was traveling with them because it was a big, whole bunch of family traveling. And they went one day, left Jesus there, and it took them 3 days when they got back to find him, but he was in the temple. So they traveled, and then they traveled back. But anyway, Jesus himself, when he was on earth, traveled to the River Jordan, where John the Baptist, his cousin, baptized him there. But then Jesus traveled some more. He went up on a mountain a lot of nights, a lot of days to pray by himself. He went to Samaria to lead a woman to him. He went to a maniac in Gadara and led him, and he sat with his mind right and everything. But Jesus did a lot of traveling, but at the end, he traveled also to the governor's house, to the judgment hall, to the place where they spit on him and crucified him to the cross. Then he went to the empty tomb, and then he got up from there, and then he said, tell my disciples, I go before them into Galilee. And it's like his last words to them was, I'm going to go. I'm going to send you a comforter, but so that comforter had to come from heaven down here. And Jesus was leaving to go up there to sit by his Father. He did a lot of traveling, but he said, go and tell the world. That's where he wants you to travel, babies. And the last being that I want to talk about going somewhere was Lucifer, who got cast down to the earth, who's going to go to hell. The devil and his angels, that's what that place is prepared for. Then they're going to be up for a little while, and they're going to be cast into the lake of fire. And that's where all the people down there where it's hot's going to go. I trust none of you under the sound of my voice will go there. So I'll see you later. Bye, babies.